So let me ask you a question. When your spouse brings up something difficult, are you listening to understand? Or are you listening for your turn to respond? Because one of those builds connection in a Christian marriage, and the other slowly destroys it. Most couples don't wake up one day and decide just to stop communicating. Instead, something much more subtle happens. Conversations start turning into debates, and small issues, they become these huge arguments. You know, you've done it before too. And before long, one or both of you begin to feel like they're not really being heard anymore. So in this video, we're going to answer 3 important questions that almost every married couple wrestles with. First, why do our conversations always seem to turn into arguments, even when we're just trying to talk through things? And then second, why does my spouse feel unheard when I feel like I'm genuinely trying to communicate? And then third, how do we break this pattern so that our conversations actually bring us closer instead of push us apart? Because when you guys understand this one communication shift, something powerful begins to happen in your marriage. Instead of conversations becoming battles, they become opportunities for connection. And then both spouses begin to feel heard and valued and understood again. So let me show you something that explains why so many conversations in marriage break down. So I want you to imagine that this ball represents communication. Communication works like this. One person shares something, and the other person receives it. They catch it, they process it, and then they respond back and forth like a simple game of catch. But here's what happens in so many marriages. One spouse throws the ball by sharing something meaningful, maybe something vulnerable, or maybe something important to them. But instead of catching it, the other spouse is already preparing for their response. They're thinking about what they want to say next. They're defending themselves in their mind, and they're getting ready to explain their side. So instead of catching the ball, it drops. And when communication keeps dropping the ball like that, couples slowly stop throwing it. They stop sharing. They literally take their ball and go home. They stop opening up, and they eventually stop communicating, and it shuts down. Well, Scripture actually speaks directly to this. Proverbs 18:2 says this. It says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but they delight in airing their own opinion." So in other words, when our goal becomes expressing our opinion instead of understanding the other person, wisdom disappears and conflict begins. And that leads to the first big question couples ask. Why do our conversations always turn to arguments? See, most couples don't feel like they're trying to fight, yet simple conversations about schedules, about money, about parenting or intimacy somehow keeps escalating. What's really happening is that both spouses are trying to be understood at the same time. Instead of listening to understand, each person starts preparing their response. They defend themselves. They explain their intentions. They correct what they think their spouse misunderstood. And before long, the conversation turns into a debate instead of a moment of connection. See, the moment our goal becomes proving our point instead of understanding our spouse, communication stops working. The ball drops. And that leads to the second question. Why does my spouse feel unheard when I feel like I'm genuinely trying? See, many husbands and wives truly believe they're communicating well. They're talking, they're explaining, they're sharing their perspective, but their spouse says things like, "You're not listening," or "You don't understand me," or "You're just defending yourself." See, the reason this happens is because feeling heard, it's not the same as being answered. Feeling heard means feeling understood. When someone shares something emotional, They're usually not asking for a correction or explanation or an answer. They're asking for acknowledgement. They want to know that what they're feeling actually landed with the person that they love. Most people don't calm down when their argument is defeated. They calm down when their feelings are understood. When someone finally feels heard, the tension in the conversation begins to drop and the defenses start to come down. So how do we actually change this pattern? All right, let me give you one simple practice that can transform the way conversations happen in your marriage. I want you to think back to the ball illustration. When your spouse throws the ball by sharing something meaningful, your job first is to catch it. That begins with reflecting on what you heard. You might say something like, "So what I hear you saying is this." And watch your tone with it, because sometimes that could come off sarcastically. "So what I hear you saying is," so reflect on it, say, "So I just want to make sure I'm right. So what you're saying is," and then repeat the heart of what they shared back to them. That simple step, it shows your spouse that the ball didn't drop, that you actually received what was said. All right, here's the second step. The second step is validation. You might say something like, "I could see why that would feel frustrating." Or you could say something like, "That makes sense why that bothered you. I get it." Now, it's important to understand that validation doesn't mean agreement. Maybe you don't get it. And if you don't say that. It simply means that you're acknowledging their experience. You're saying, "I see you. I hear you," right? What you're feeling matters. And then after those two steps, you respond. You can share your perspective, your thoughts, or your feelings. But because your spouse already feels heard, the conversation becomes much calmer. So let me review that. Catch the ball, acknowledge that you catch the ball, and then you can share your feelings. And here's the beautiful thing about this. When someone feels heard, they stop fighting to be understood. Their defenses drop, their tone softens, and suddenly the conversation shifts from two people arguing against each other to two people trying to connect and understand each other. And that's when real connection begins to happen. Now, if you're honest, you might be thinking, "Yeah, that sounds great in theory," but in a heated conversation, it can be really hard to slow down and respond that way. And the reason's simple. Communication problems in marriage are rarely just communication problems. They're really heart problems. And when we feel hurt, frustrated, or misunderstood, our natural instinct is to defend ourselves and prove our point or shut down. But Scripture calls us to something different. It calls us to respond with grace. So the real question is this: how do we actually respond with grace in the middle of difficult conversations? How do we move from defending ourselves to truly understanding our spouse? So, in this next video, I show you how grace can completely transform the way husbands and wives respond to each other. So if you want to see your communication and your marriage begin to change, then click this next video and I'll walk you through exactly how that works.